I think it, like a lot of issues, are being impacted by the ubiquitous nature of technology. And on this, as with many issues, we're changing, and just the long-standing business models are changing right before our eyes. And we, as government and as a society and consumers, are all, and industry, are all, I think, in the midst of seeing these issues evolve. I mean, you can see it with technology on so many long-standing business models and industries. And I think that with this issue, like so many where technology is influencing these long-standing business models, there's some work to be done to just see exactly where it's going and what is the role of government in that vein.
I mean, you're obviously concerned about debt and bad loans and big banks taking advantage of poor folk. Does it make sense to have this be a slot machine? Isn't this a recipe to rip people off?
I am not prepared to form an opinion and express one right now because we're studying it, and I with issues like that want to be very well informed about exactly where it's going and what the potential of my opinion would be before I just express something off the cuff, and I would be doing that now, and I don't want to. Voters are probably going to see it as an issue for them on a statewide ballot in the next 2 years, and I think they'll make a decision. In terms of where I am at this moment, I think I'm absolutely in favor of medical marijuana. I've personally known people who only benefited from its use. I think what's happening in Colorado and Washington is going to be very helpful to California in deciding where we go with this issue, and I've in fact talked with the AGs of both states to get their impressions on where it's going and the role of an AG's office and the role of law enforcement and the impact to public safety, the impact to local law enforcement. There are a lot of variables. So it's something that we're watching, and I think California can do well to let Washington and Colorado work it out and see how that actually does work.
Tobacco. Do you think marijuana, if it becomes legal, should be advertised like beer or not advertised like tobacco?
I think that marijuana is something that will, not unlike beer or tobacco to your point, we should examine and be clear about the effects in terms of minors and the impact to them physiologically. And that would be one of the, I think, important variables to address in determining whether, if it were legal, it should be allowed to be advertised.
So is that yes or no on advertising?
Yes or no. Do you believe that marijuana can damage permanently or disable the brain of somebody who is 15 through 18 years old? That's the answer to that question for me, is we'd have to study it and be very clear about what are the impacts in terms of any permanent physiological harm, and in particular to minors. Just like we then determined, and that was part of the basis for us determining whether or not we would allow tobacco or alcohol to be advertised. And so the same analysis and logic in my mind should apply if marijuana were legal. Well, essentially that they're watching it, and that they're all grappling as part of just leadership of their own states with figuring out how exactly the details of it all will be addressed through regulation, through rules, through protocols. We saw that on our own in California when we passed 215, which I absolutely supported. It was almost aspirational as a law, meaning we said this is how we feel, right? But we didn't work out the details, and so at one point then, Los Angeles had more dispensaries than Starbucks, right? So the details matter.
So were the AGs, were they seeing any emerging problems or issues that they wanted to head off early, or just that they were looking at it?
They're watching it.
What were some of the specifics there?
Well, I'm not going to share what were otherwise confidential conversations, but essentially they're all watching it and trying to be a part of the leadership of their state in supporting a law that is a law of their state, but doing it in a way that's not going to jeopardize public safety and not create confusion for local law enforcement. And also just, in terms of, it's an interesting issue because it's not only a law enforcement, public safety, public health issue, it's also an issue that relates to urban planning and zoning and and a number of other issues. So there are a lot of folks who I think can weigh in on how it should roll out if it were legalized, and but for all of these reasons, it should also be a comprehensive plan that includes the input and the contribution of all of those sectors, because they all invariably will be impacted. I mean, it's creating a new industry, and all that comes with that has to be thought out. And there's a role for everybody, including AGs, obviously. It's a state role.
Do you believe the death penalty is constitutional?
I do not support the death penalty. That's a long-standing position and belief of mine, as we have discussed for many years.
Sure.
And for many reasons. I believe that it is a flawed system. But I also will follow the law as it is currently written, and especially in my capacity as the Attorney General and the top lawyer of the state. So, and that is what we've done for the last 4 years. And we'll continue to do that in terms of my official role on the issue.
Do you think the death penalty is constitutional?
I am not going to express an opinion as the Attorney General on the constitutionality of the death penalty. That's something that ultimately the courts are going to have to decide, and ultimately it's going to be the United States Supreme Court, not the Attorney General of California.
Do you think the number of crimes that are warrant the death penalty in California should be reduced, or there's a lot of them there that may or may not warrant the death penalty? Should maybe looked at, reviewed, pared down?
Knowing the list as I do, I will tell you that the crimes that are eligible for the death penalty are some of the most outrageous, egregious types of crimes and behavior that human beings can engage in. And so I don't have any sense of leniency in terms of making a distinction between one type of person who is eligible for the death penalty or another. As far as I'm concerned, people who are eligible for the death penalty should spend the rest of their lives in jail.
The death penalty is sort of imposed differently from county to county, DA to DA. And some people have suggested that maybe the Attorney General's office should be the arbitrator of when to bring the death penalty in certain cases. Do you support that, or what are your thoughts about that?
No, I think we have rightly designed the system to give the elected DAs discretion to make those types of decisions based on the law and the circumstances and the facts as presented to them. And I think this is why we have also decided that we will have elected DAs, and they will be elected based on their priorities as it relates to a number of issues, including this, and they will be held accountable to their community and their constituency in terms of how they make those decisions. And if they're not doing it in a way that community likes, they'll be voted out of office. But I think that the DAs should have that discretion. There can't be a formula for these kinds of cases. There can be factors, which there are, but not a formula that must be blindly followed, because none of these cases are alike. When you look at the facts of the case, when you look at how you would then compare the facts of that case to similar cases and take into account aggravation and mitigation, let's also remember that it's not only the DAs that are influencing the outcome. It is a jury of 12 people who will make a decision, and the decision they make has to be a unanimous decision based on the law and the evidence. There is a judge in that courtroom who is determining what evidence comes in and whether there is any bias or any impropriety or any misconduct. There is a court of appeal that is involved in the process. So we have rightly, and to some people would criticize it, we have rightly designed the system to say that in these cases, and in particular death penalty cases, we are going to put all types of mechanisms in place to ensure that that due process occurs and that there are checks and balances.